So Tom,
Yo.
that was actually pretty good, right?
Yeah.
What we just saw.
Amazing.
That's a lot different than what we used to do at NAMM, me and you.
Yeah, that was like early days.
Yeah, we used to give demos, for NI back in the day at NAMM, which is a long time ago. So before we talk about your career and how you ended up where you are now, doing film, scoring, let's talk a little bit about NI first, and we'll kind of ease into it. You've been a user since '96, I think, since the beginning, in Holland. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how you got turned on to Reaktor and to NI back in the day.
Well, I'm old enough to be part of that scene, unfortunately. Yeah, it was like in the 90s when Regenerator started, and it caught my attention immediately because now, in the digital world, we were able to build modules and to drag them in and connect them together, which was really great. At the time, it was an experiment for everybody, for the makers, but also for the users. So I would use it on a dedicated machine. It was extremely crash sensitive, and I would always record non-stop what I was doing, just to make sure I had an audio clip of it. And it was really fantastic. It was the time where the computer really started to revolutionize what you were able to do. And it was a fantastic time period. And I'm coming from the traditional world where in the 80s, we would record demos in studios on tape, and, I would have 4-track recorders. But since the 90s, we had computers that could record, so you could edit stuff. And I mean, for everybody here in this room, it's so normal at this point that was the case. But back then, it was sensational.
So then you started getting into Reaktor then, but then as time went on, you eased into other synths that NI brought out, like Absynth. I know you're a big Absynth user, and then you eventually got into Contact. But you were doing dance music back then, not film work, right?
Yeah, I did other things too, but I always loved synthesizers, and I always loved the particular sound that Native Instrument had. It has a very unique sound to it, and I've always loved it. And there's one plugin that you guys might not even know that Native Instruments used to make, and it was so fantastic. It was called the Spectral Delay, and they discontinued it. But man, I mean, that was like nights and nights in a row of just absolute madness. Just dragging the frequencies out and sequence them differently. It was just fantastic.
So maybe you can talk a little bit about some of your other favorite synths since back then that you kind of eased into, because I know you're also a big Contact user. Yes.
Well, my favorite synth out of all of them is still Absynth, and the FM8, back then FM7, and all the custom stuff that I built myself in Reaktor. And it's very inspiring to see, just a demo about the kick drum. I have to give credit to one of my very best friends who worked with me for a long time, Andre Etema, who also designed a lot of sound banks for Native Instruments. But we worked together really closely, and we built absolutely insane stuff in Reaktor. And I'm still so happy that I'm the only one having it. And I still pull it up. I still have very old versions of Reaktor installed on different machines where those things really run on smoothly. We started building those in 2004 2002 till 2006. And so my special interest with Reaktor has always been granular synthesis. And we built absolutely ridiculous modules where you would load anywhere between 2 and 10 WAV files, and it would do different granular synthesis, whether it was run by a sequencer or not. And then this is what spiked Mate and some other developers to develop the Viering. Do you guys remember what that is? The Viering, the module? I was working at the time not only on my own records, but I was also producing Sasha's Air Drawn Dagger, and we had an analog desk, and we had analog gates and EQs and sequencers. And basically, what we did is we took any signal and we would split it up in 4 to 6 different frequency bands, and then we would sequence all the different frequency bands individually from another with analog drum computers. And so we could create, we would create, in the beginning we didn't know what we were doing, and then we started experimenting, and what used to be very successful is to have like a saw path from a Roland Jupiter synth that had a lot of low ends and a lot of sizzling high ends. I would feed that in the chain. And then we would have low frequencies anywhere below 60 hertz. And they would be just like boom, 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 boom. But then the rest of the pad would be sequenced differently. So any frequencies between 100 and 200 hertz would be gong, 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 gong. And then we started doing stuff at the mid frequencies and the high frequencies and even higher. And then we made feedback loops to take the outputs of those frequencies and just feed them back into the different frequencies. So there was a feedback almost starting to happen, but it got cut off by the gates. And that became such a unique sound that Mate, one of the owners of Native Instruments, like, I want a module that makes that sound. And that became the Fairing. And then I think it was built, I'm blanking on his name.
Stefan Schmidt?
Yeah, okay. Brilliant synthesizer builder. So then we took that thing and we did our thing with it. And so I have a couple of these custom-made modules. So the latest one that I built was around 2006, where we took the 6-frequency splitter, all sequenced with different rhythms, but then the input would be a live input, but then at the same time that live input would be live granulized, and then going back and forth over the signal, also feeding that same chain.
So this was a sort of method that you would do doing dance records back then, correct?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know your setup, I've seen your setup, we've worked together. Maybe you can explain a little bit how your setup has changed from making dance records to film scores, because I don't know if you're familiar with a lot of Tom's scores, but I mean, I don't even know where to start. The new Black Mass with Johnny Depp, the Mad Max, the Batman Superman, 300, you just go down the list. But some of them are very electronic, some of them aren't. So maybe you can explain a little bit how that sort of, process from making dance records has gone to your film scores. Is it the same sort of method? Because like on the Black Mass, it's sort of a traditional kind of classic score as opposed to, I think, Mad Max, right? Which is...
Yeah, Mad Max is just pure madness. But anyway, the setup that I had when I was making, when I was Junkie XL, the artist remixer, whatever you want to call it, I would open, at the time I was working in Logic and Pro Tools, I would open my standard template and it had absolutely 0 tracks loaded. So every time I worked on a track, it's like, okay, I got to do this again. And I would never reuse kicks or snares. I would make a few uniquely for that specific track, and then for the next track, it's like, okay, let's move on. Let's make something else. Now with film scoring, I do the same thing, but there are certain things you constantly go back to. So it would be very stupid to constantly load them again, like a certain short string or a horn sample or a drum sample. So I went through the trouble over the last 6 to 8 years to basically create my own libraries, and I switched to Cubase actually, and I constantly switch software programs, whatever suits me the best. I started back in the 80s with Pro 24, which was built by the Cubase designer and by the Logic designer when they were still friends. But as it often happened in Germany, like, it's like, whatever. So they split up, they became their own thing. I went back and forth between Logic and Cubase, and 3 years ago, I thought Cubase was better for me than Logic, and I switched. I might switch back again, who knows? But at this point, I built something that even the Cubase developers didn't believe was even possible. I have a basic system, which is my Cubase PC. It's a server unit. It's not a PC that you can buy in a store. It's something that is especially built for you. And then I have 6 more server units that work as external VSL sampler machines where Kontakt comes into play. For people that don't know what VSL is, it's a software made by Vienna, the company, I think it's from Switzerland or Austria.
I don't know where it's actually made in Vienna.
Austria, I think. And so they made this software program which you install on one computer and you install it on where your DAW lives. And then you can insert a plugin that basically starts talking to that external machine, and you can load up any instrument there, whether it's a sampler or a synthesizer, and you can create extra audio returns into your DAW to make that work. Now, I've been able to set up with some wizardly, from my tech guy, Stephen Perrone, we've actually created over 3,800 VST returns in Cubase. And Cubase...
It's sick. You actually have to see it.
I mean, you scroll through the template and it's insane, but it works, and it works flawlessly without any crashes, and it defies even the rules of networking, because we're working with 1 gigabyte network cards, and it shouldn't even work with the amount of data that goes through it, but it does work. What can I say? It works every day. It's really great. So a lot of these things are loaded constantly. So for instance, my drum library, which I recorded myself over the years, contains out of more than 1,200 instruments, and they're always loaded at all times. I have my own string libraries, my own brass libraries, woodwind libraries. Of course, I use the commercial products too, but it's so hard in the film scoring world to define your own voice, because you were talking about an orchestra, and it's been used for hundreds of years. So for me, the sound is a very important part of it, and the difference between an electronic template, like you just asked, and a film scoring template is that an electronic template I always like to open and there's nothing there, and it's like, okay, so what are we going to do today? Okay, I need a bass drum. Okay, let's make one. I need a snare drum. Okay, let's make one. And with film scoring, you do that too for the unique instruments that come into play for a film score. But you always need to fall back on a couple of things that you always need. Oh, I need this violin line here. It would be very stupid at that point to insert Kontakt and then look for the string sample or the string program that you need, and then you need to load it, and you want to put a reverb on it, and you want to put a little bit of EQ on it. So that takes a lot out of your time. So for film scoring, it's actually great. You have a template preloaded, but you still make original sounds.
And then in your Kontakt players, you make a special GUI in the script for the film, right? Often? Yeah, so he'll open up the Mad Max, and there's the GUI of the film.
Yeah, so we make unique instruments in Kontakt for all these things. So then some instruments are very darn simple, so they're just basically sample playback, and some instruments have very complicated scripting that does whatever I want the instrument to do. And but at any given time when a film score template is open, we're talking about anywhere between 6,000 and 9,000 Kontakt instruments that are open.
Yeah, it's honestly, I mean, I know I said this before, but you really have to see it. He has this custom sort of tablet. What'd you call it? Yeah, it's like a PC tablet that's like a 27-inch or something, and it's shortcuts for Cubase and for Kontakt, right?
Yeah, there are all kinds of shortcuts in there, and at this point, any given software program we saw some great examples tonight of people that build their own controllers. And we live in a world right now where you can build complicated macros in Cubase. And we actually came up with a system to really work with that. I'll give you a very simple example. There's certain things you always do in a row. Like for instance, I don't care what sequence program you work with, but you play a certain section of a song and you're just like, okay, that sounds great. I don't know. And then you press stop and you've recorded that thing, and then you open the editor, and then you select the notes that you just recorded, and you quantize them, and then you zoom in so you could see them all, and then you make the length of the notes all the same. Well, Cubase or any other program gives you the option to make, these really snazzy macros. So when I'm sitting behind the keyboard and I press play and I play, I press this button, and then I don't even need to hit record. I just play while the sequence is running, and then it does retrospect record, which means whatever you just played is now considered being a recording. It opens the key editor, it puts the left locator on my first note, the right locator on the right note. All the notes are quantized, all the notes are connected through legato mode. They're all set to the same velocity, and all just like in one go. So you could always question yourself, okay, I'm doing so many things like this. I'm doing this. Another macro I just made is one where you create a sample library for yourself, and you have a sample from bar 1 to 3, and you have a sample from 4 to 6, and you have one from 7 to 9, and so forth. You have like hundreds of samples in a row. So I created this macro where just like one press on the button, it starts bouncing out all these individual samples by moving the markers to the new location, adding things to the name how I want them, storing them in the right location, and then after that, build a contact instrument. So I just hit like one button, and then I come back.
But I've never seen that in other DAWs. I've only seen this with Cubase, I think. I don't know if you guys have, but
no, there are options to do that. With Pro Tools, you've got quick keys. You could do really snazzy stuff with that. Quick keys will always work. Will also work for other programs. Logic has also the logical.
But you have it mapped on that. It's sort of like a big iPad, and it's just sitting there in front of the keyboard, and it's kind of like a lemur in layman's terms.
Now, it's the same for the scripting with Contact and the modules that you build for Reaktor. Is like you spend so much time, when you go into depth, like we just saw, creating the bass drum, and basically you can just save that as a macro, and then so you always have it, and you bring it back in, and then you start making something better out of it. So in the early days, I have to be really honest, I've been so busy, I haven't really delved into Reaktor 6 yet. Mm-hmm. But I'm sure the system is still the same. Like you could work on a cell level, you could work on a macro level, and you can save all these individual things, and then you can save ultimately the instrument, and then ultimately you could save multiple instruments. And you can constantly dive in and just, grab these little bits. And we were talking about that earlier, which is great about the forum, for Reaktor, is that I remember in the past that I would, under a different name, I would throw it just like, is there anybody out there that knows how to build this? Because your knowledge of Reaktor is only so much, but all of us together in one room can kill the fucking beast, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, that's the best kept secret, is that sort of user forum.
That's the secret of the forum, like some people are very specialized in certain things. And with the granular synthesis, we were just scratching our head and banging our heads against the wall. It's like, how are we going to tackle this? And then just one message on the forum, and then within 2 days, like some kid showed us, how to do it, It's like some I mean, seriously, some 16-year-old kid showed two 34-year-old guys. Like, okay, guys, you did it all wrong. You got to do it like this. It's like, oh, thanks, and then you know how it works.
So I want to talk a little bit about your modular setup, because we notice up here there's sort of a lunchbox of a Euro rack, I think. He has maybe $150,000 rack of modular synths. It's like a wall. And you played me just recently some incredible sounds that you were doing for a film. And you had mentioned how certain sounds with the modular stuff you can't get from digital, right? And some that you can't get, just from the analog. Maybe you can kind of explain why they're both very valuable.
I want to take that discussion back to 89, 88, where I had a 4-track recorder, and the 4-track recorder was a shitty Tascam thing. Now, by standards, back then it was the flagship you could get. As the amateur musician, it was $150 a day to rent, and it took like a shitty cassette, that you stick in. But what the beauty of that thing is that it had so much bleed in to the other track, because it was like a very tiny cassette, and there's left, right, one way, and then if you play the tape back, it's like left, right, on the other. So it's like 4 tracks. So if you play it back and you have a special head, you can record on all the 4 tracks. So what was great is that if you record a drum track on track 1, and you would take the fader out, and you would play track 2, you would hear the drum track. And then track 3, a little bit of the drum track, and then track 4, not so much of the drum track. What I'm heading at is that if you record bass, and if you record guitar and then vocals, there would be so much cross-bleed of what you were recording onto the other tracks that mixing was super easy. Because it all was like, you just put the faders up and it was like kind of there. And the same goes for the old 16-track recorders and the 24-track recorders. That's what made mixing so special. Now, the end of the 80s, I was in a sort of like amateur band at the time, but we tried interesting things, and we got approached by this producer who had the first Fairlight in Holland, the country that I'm from, which is right next to Germany. And he had a Fairlight sampler, and he said, like, let's do a record together. Now we're talking early digital age, and there was no bleed over anymore. So you would record the drums on track 1, and you would listen to track 2, and it was like, no drums. Track 3, no drums. So everything you would record would be so incredibly isolated. So when you try to mix, it's like, fuck, I can't get this shit together. Just like, I can't make this work. So, okay, I guess I need a compressor, or I guess I need this, or I need that. And it was so hard to mix. Okay, let's now fast forward to 2015. Yes, I've got this wall of modular synths, analog synths. And I've got everything in the digital world. Now, these analog walls of synthesizers, they're great, but the process that you just saw to make a bass drum is like 50 times worse on an analog wall. It takes forever to get a sound. And once it's there, it's beautiful. You get all these things for free. All these things that's happening. It's like, what? Did I just do that? No, wait a minute. Something must be wrong, but it sounds great. Let's record. But as soon as you start taking the patch cables out, it's gone. You can't save a preset. And the only thing you have is your memory. And the more you patch these patches, the handier you get at it, and the more exciting it becomes. But it has a lot of downsides. It's very unpredictable. It's very out of tune most of the time.
So then there are times that you go to, let's say, Reaktor, a digital version of that. And is that for a sound or a convenience?
No, but so what I just said about the tapes and the digital recording is the benefits you had from analog and the downsides you had from digital. But once I started understanding what digital recording was all about, I was like, oh, I never want to go back to the analog recording, but because now I get it. And then past that phase of I don't want to go back to analog, I discovered it's like, well, there were a few things that were great about analog. So you started combining them like hand in hand. Now this is exactly what now happens with me in the synthesizer world. Reaktor, Absynth, FM8 gives me stuff that is so unique, that is so out there. I could not make that with the analog synths. But what I get with the analog synths, it's very hard to get with the digital synths. So it's the combination of both things that keeps it, for me, extremely interesting. And probably for everybody out here is that your instruments are tools, to express whatever you want to express as an artist. And the cool thing with Native is that it gives you an easy step in to achieve that. Very good example of that is Massive, where it's very easy to get quick results. But then, like a complicated car, you open up the hood and it's like, holy shit. Like you can take it to a whole different level.
So now that you're a full-time composer, how do you make that choice of sample versus synth? And so what kind of synth? Is it FM? Is it sort of granular? Because I think a lot of composers that I've seen, they're either one style. They're either all in the box or they're a traditional. And I know with you, like at your studio, you've got these old pump organs, you've got, super modern, technology, but you use it all.
Yeah, and sometimes I regret certain things that I do, but the organ that you just mentioned is I call them Chardonnay buys. Just like you down a bottle of wine and then you go on eBay. Very bad idea. And so I ended up with an 18-foot pipe organ in my living room, and I remember I was cutting the vegetables in the kitchen when my wife came home with my 2-year-old, and she didn't saw I was in the kitchen, and I just heard from the front of the house, "Oh no, 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 no." And so that was the organ.
No, but you have these big drums that you actually record, as opposed to getting some sort of sample library and.
No, I don't do that. Like I try to get a good example was Mad Max. When I saw that guitar player in front of the truck, I was like, okay, I got to come up with some stuff that fits with that. It's not like, oh, let's load up a guitar library and then just play something. It's not going to work. I mean, you got to get some pedals, you got to experiment, and you got to play around with it. But when you say like synth versus sample, I love synths, I love to program them, but I love synths even more when I jam with them and it becomes this jam session. You're just playing with the parameters and you get these weird things. And I record that all in. And then I take chunks of it and then I chop them up in bite-sized loops and then I throw them into Contact. And I'll tell you why I do that, is that when you make a track for yourself, you could say, oh, I'm going to take a few weeks to do this. And excuse me, nobody finds that an issue, that you take a few weeks to make a great dance record or a great electronic soundscape or whatever you're working on. Now, the problem in the film industry is that they want something, yesterday. And the deadlines are sometimes yesterday. So there have been a few movies. Fury Road I had 18 months to work on, which was stressful on another end. But then 300 Rise of an Empire or Black Mass, I got brought in so late that when I finally got hired, it was like, okay, it needs to be done in 3.5, 4 weeks. And to do a 2-hour score in 4 weeks is very challenging, at least. So at that point, you need to fall back on a solid sound library that you have created when you had the time to dig around. And at that point you don't, you know. So when you have 4 weeks to do a 2-hour film score, it's not like, yeah, let's turn on the modular synths and spend like a full weekend to create a saw wave with a filter. You know, it's not going to work.
So you're using technology to your advantage.
Yes,
obviously.
So I have my synth recordings combined over the last 10 years is close to 6 terabytes on a drive. And it's very funny, like my wife constantly needs to explain to me how to program the fucking microwave. But when you ask me, it's like, didn't you do like a CS80 synth session like 6 years ago? It's like, yeah, it's on sample drive number 21, and then you go to that folder, and then it's there. So for whatever reason, I remind that. And it's so important to, when you have time to, you know, to become, I mean, this almost sounds erotic, but to become one with your synthesizer, you know, and just really like it's that thing, like the magic between you and the synthesizer. Now, from that point on, it doesn't matter whether it's analog. Yeah, analog sounds cool. Oh, it's a fucking wall. You can touch it. You can touch the knob. And when you take a picture, it looks impressive. But it has nothing to do with that. It's the same with any digital synth or. That's why, you know, having a big studio, I always disliked, because it takes the intimacy out of the creative process. I mean, yeah, I work on big movies, but I mean, my studio, you've seen it. It's in a garage. It's like a you know, a shitty floor and just a couple of speakers and a monitor and the synths, right?
No, I mean, and this kind of lends to maybe not the last question, but really the sort of bigger question, because. A lot of composers in this town are very, you know, competitive, I think, and they're very secretive about how they work, you know. And I've never seen this before in any other sort of genre. And you know, Tom is very open of how you work, where you work, what instruments you use, how you sequence, etc. And if you haven't gone to his YouTube page. It's fantastic. He has a whole series. If you ever have time, you should watch it. And maybe you can explain that, because for me as a music maker, it's extremely refreshing to know that somebody at your level has no problem talking about how they work, because it's a tool. Everything is a tool. With Reaktor, with everything that you've seen tonight, it's how you use it. And I just want to say thank you for doing that, because for all of us people who make music, there's no reason to hide it. So maybe you can explain a little bit about your YouTube page and actually why you do it.
Well, it has a little bit to do with my upbringing. My mom was a teacher, and she was all about sharing. And then when you get into your teens and into your early 20s, the last thing you want to talk about or think about is sharing. It's like, fuck no, that's mine, you know. And then you get a little older. And then that interest comes back, and then when you start reading certain books, when you start reading about like how old scientists and philosophers did it, like even going back to the Roman and the Greek time, you know, they shared all that information. It was not about like holding it in, because holding stuff in, I think, eventually will create a creative suffering or you know, a shortage of fuel. And I don't want to get too spiritual, but I've always felt like, you know, when I treat people a certain way, when I share information a certain way, that comes towards you as well. And it has been a very interesting roadmap for me. Like I've met so many amazing DJs when I was still working as an electronic producer, but also composers right now that, you know, share all their knowledge with me, and I'm sharing my knowledge with the world. Not in a sense like, oh, this is how you should be scoring a film. No, because, I mean, who am I to say that? I mean, like, talk to Ennio Morricone. He knows really how to do that, you know? But at least I can say how I work and how I ran into challenges and how you could potentially overcome those challenges. First on a very technical end, but also, you know, an emotional end. And I've ran a course of 8 years in in the Netherlands, and I tried to build a 4-year university course pretty much built on a model how Berkeley is done in Boston, like super high quality and, good material, good software, good computers. And it turned out to be very successful. The last year I was there, we had people from China, from Poland, from the US, 2 people. It was very, very encouraging. So when I quitted that, I was like, okay, maybe now it's time to do something else. And that's when the whole social media thing became about, to make great instruction videos and just really take people into depth. Just not like, like you said, there's so many stories out there where people hint at certain things that you're so interested in as somebody that's really focused on that specific subject. I remember seeing a documentary when I was really young. I think I was 12, and it was a documentary about the Police, the band, the Police, and Andy Summers was like, a hero for me, as a guitar player. And it was just like a 10-second segment of him talking about his chorus pedal. It's like how I made it sound. And I was like, just 10 seconds. Why can't it be longer? And it's all I ever saw of him, talking about how he got his sound. And it doesn't take anything away from what makes you unique or what not makes you unique. For me, it's not a problem to explain in detail how I did Mad Max, because I'm not going to be doing a movie like that again. So my head is like somewhere else. Therefore, I think sharing is good, because you say, well, this is how I did that, but that doesn't mean I'm going to do 50 movies more that sound identical. So therefore, I feel threatened that if I throw that out there, that my position is going to be vulnerable or something like that.
Yeah, I think if you have a chance, you should watch it, because he goes into just the drums for Mad Max, then how the score with strings came about. It's very interesting. So maybe now is a good time to open up the floor with some questions. I'm certain you guys have a lot of questions. Where's Konstantin? How much time is Konstantin or Matab here? Okay, I don't know how much time we have, but we're gonna, there's Brian. Okay, so we have a microphone.
Yep.
Anybody have a question? I saw someone, yep.
So on that note, on the videos that were online, you had an automation controller that was really awesome. I just wanted to know if I can get the name. You were creating vibrato for your strings. Do you remember the name of your automation controller?
You mean the touchscreen that I have?
No, you were
the fader automation.
Yes.
It's a JL Cooper. It's a standard box, but the cool thing about the box is that it has I don't even know what the maximum is. I think 99 presets. So preset number 1 is always, for me, the left one is mod wheel, which usually controls the intensity of the classical samples, and so we use that same controller for all the custom-made libraries to do something similar. The one next over is expression. So what I usually do is that I use volume to set as a certain level, and then with expression, which is a secondary volume, I do like fade-ins and fade-outs and things like that. But then if I think at a certain point, overall, the sound is too loud, then with volume, I can tick it down by 10 or 15, and I maintain my shape of the level. And then the fader next to it, standard is set up for controller 16. In controller 16, I use in contact to adjust the sample start. So if we talk about, for instance, a string or a drum, especially a bass drum, the moment the pedal hits to the skin, it creates like a displacement of air, and then it finally hits the skin. So when you zoom in on an acoustic bass drum, you see there's rumble going on, and then it gets more, and then you have the tick of the bass drum. So if you cut that stuff out, you get a bass drum that has a strong attack, but it has an unnatural sound to it. So when I set controller 16 to maximum, it's cut to the kick drum. So when I play it, I can play tuk, 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 and it has like a strong thing to it. But then the track header has a pre-delay of 59 milliseconds, which is exactly the time that I need to get the air in. So when I play the kick drum in, I can do tuk, 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 and when I'm done, controller 16 is set to 0, so it has the full simple. The track header is already set to minus 59 milliseconds, and the bass drum is back in time again, but now I have the air at the entrance. And then the last 3 faders of the JL Cooper are called closed room surround, and that is for all the samples that I've created that are sampled in surround. All my samples play multi-microphone positions at the same time. So there's a closed mic, which has its own track, then there's the room, which is its own track, and then the surrounds, which are really the back mics, which also has its own audio files. So there's always 3 to 6 audio files streaming at the same time when I play a sample. And with those 3 faders, I can determine whether the drums is super dry with just a closed mic, or whether it's super roomy with just the rooms and the surround and a little bit of close. So that's my basic setup for the JL Cooper. And if I go to page 2, I have 8 controllers for some of my synths, and then I go to page 3, I have 8 more controllers for snazzy stuff in Contact, and so I skip through those constantly, and I write it into Cubase, and then I go back to page 1, which is my standard control.
Thank you for your time.
That was a great answer for 1 MIDI controller. So did you guys all get that? That's how you program a kick drum for Mad Max. Okay, we have a few more, one more question, or maybe 2, if it's quick. We're out of time, sorry.
I appreciate you coming out here and sharing with us. I had a quick question. You had mentioned some YouTube channels. Which are some of the ones that you have been more impressed with in reference to the instructional side of being able to develop the craft more?
Sorry, come again, like the reverb is.
What are some of the YouTube channels that you had mentioned in reference to instructional videos that you were more impressed with?
Well, I'm actually impressed with people, especially users, that take a lot of time to make these videos, and I don't even know what channels they are. For me, it all comes through Twitter, which is like retweets of people or certain companies that I like, that I follow. A lot of stuff I find on Synthopia. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that Twitter account. And then it's like, it's the age that we live in right now. So it says, oh, watch this great video of a guy building something in Reaktor. Just a simple example. You click on it, you watch it, you consume it for 2-3 minutes. It's like, oh, that was awesome. Click, next. You know what I mean? And you forget what I do pretty much everything on my phone and my iPad, when it comes to that. Sometimes it happens that certain people are so interesting in what they present that you remember you've seen a video 2 weeks before, 3 weeks before, and then you're just like, I got to find this guy, and then you follow this guy on Facebook or on Twitter or on Instagram. That's usually how it works for me. I have the same with music consumption. I got asked like a couple of days ago, so what bands have you listened to lately? And I was like, I don't remember. I just like had all these really interesting links that take me to YouTube, or sometimes it's embedded in the tweet, and you watch it and it's like, man, that was amazing. Retweet, next. And you completely forget who it was or who it did. And it's also something that I kind of like, and that's what I like about film scoring. It's more anonymous, so you're doing the work, and it's like a team effort, and it's less about, who you are, or it's like, oh, here's a stage, and I'm just going to take the applause or something like that. It's more about the work, and that's how I consume music now at this point too. And the instructional videos, as you mentioned.
All right, we have time for one more. Sorry, we can hang out after and talk.
I was wondering if you could touch on like the multiplicity of your sounds, like you're making electronic music where you'd have split up into the different frequency ranges, and then feed those all back in, and sort of like the cycle evolution of your sounds, where you're going to do it, in the real world with the drum, and then record it, bring it into little pieces, bring it into contact, make an instrument, and whether that kind of comes back out at some point and gets recorded with the multi-mics in the room, and kind of if that is crucial to finding your own sort of voice or your own unique, sounds or visions for the projects you're working on.
Yeah, so when I make sounds, I make sounds in all kinds of different frequency ranges. And when I make samples, I take a lot of time mixing them, and I have a standard return for certain types of sounds. But then when you work on a specific song or a specific scene, you EQ it again, and you work it again. And what's really interesting, I never understood that until I got really into it, is that you always know you have to battle the sound effects. And in best case scenario, you work together with the sound effects guys. And in an ultimate scenario, you have a director that says, this specific scene is just sound effects with a little bit of music, and this specific scene is going to be music with a little bit of sound effects. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. So when you hear the sound effects track on its own, and you analyze what those frequencies are, you have to come up with music that doesn't interfere necessarily with that. So, good example, 300 Rise of an Empire, which is, it's a sword and sandal movie, technically. So these guys are just like, clash, 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 and that's all you're listening to. So it's all the white noise area, starting anywhere from 2K to 5K very aggressively. So the worst thing that you can do is to start with a score that is all built around very complicated hi-hat rhythms in that same frequency range. It's not going to work. It's better to focus on lower frequencies. So you also delve into the sounds that you envisioned making in the past that could potentially work for scenes like that or pieces of music like that. Even though I never really categorize my sounds in like low, mid, high, or super high, because there are always elements in them that fuck it up, to say. Especially when you get into sound design, you can create sounds that have... is anyone familiar with... never mind. I wanted to say it's like the techno that was made anywhere between 1999 and 2004, where there's this producer Rizio, I think he was called, Basic Channel, that was the label, and he had these really interesting low pulsing frequencies, but then there was like something white noisy sitting on top, but ever so subtle. So that's what I have in my sounds a lot as well, where you just like, okay, it has that, but it has the bottom end. So the frequency structure is always very complicated, and when you create sounds, you create them maybe for one purpose, but you might end up using them for a completely different purpose, completely re-EQ'd, reprocessed. You can never envision on forehand exactly what will be the perfect hat for the person that comes in and says, I want to buy this red hat with like yellow spots on it, and it needs to sit like this, and you're just like, I just made that hat. Most likely, you got to fix it. You got somewhere a red hat, you somewhere have like some yellow dots that you can glue on it, and that's always how it goes with sound.